The price of a slap at the airport was a ruin that would last a lifetime. My husband thought he was the king of the world when he struck my cheek to protect his mistress. He forgot that the plane tickets, the hotel, and every credit card in his wallet were in my name. The instant his hand hit my face, I decided that in the next instant, I would turn him into a beggar on the street. This is my story, a one-way ticket to hell for them. That morning, the atmosphere in Terminal 4 of JFK Airport was unusually cold, a stark contrast to Catherine's heart, which burned with an incandescent passion. She adjusted the plush, cream-colored wool coat wrapped around her. With her right hand, she pushed a cart carrying 2 large suitcases. Today was the day she had been waiting for the last 2 years. The winter vacation in Whistler, Canada wasn't just a trip for her. It was a gift to herself, after working tirelessly to build the catering and real estate business she inherited from her family. Catherine managed a faint smile behind her mask, imagining the snowflakes that would welcome her in British Columbia. She had prepared everything to perfection, from the business-class plane tickets to the lodging in a luxurious cabin and the list of gourmet restaurants to visit. But as she approached the meeting point near Gate B22, the smile slowly faded from her face. Her heart began to pound, not with anticipation but with a sudden gut-wrenching confusion. There was her husband Mark, wearing the black leather jacket she had bought him just last week. Mark was not alone. At his side, his mother-in-law sported a flashy faux fur shawl around her neck. But it wasn't the presence of his mother that made Catherine's blood boil. It was the figure of the young woman standing with them. It was Amber. Catherine only knew her as a former co-worker of Mark's, whom he often referred to as just a friend. Amber, in a tight pink sweater, clung to Mark's arm and let out a flirtatious laugh. Catherine stopped the cart a few feet away from them, took a deep breath to calm the tumult in her chest, and approached. The sound of the cart's wheels made the 3 of them turn their heads. A flicker of surprise crossed Mark's face. However, he quickly replaced it with a placid, serene expression, as if nothing were out of place. His mother, on the other hand, shot her a questioning glare, scrutinizing her from head to toe. Amber, for her part, let go of Mark's arm and adopted a face of feigned innocence. In a voice struggling to remain calm, Catherine asked what was going on. Why were they all there with large suitcases? Mark, in a light tone that belittled Catherine, replied that he had decided to take his mother and Amber on vacation. According to him, it wasn't fair for him to have fun alone while his mother and her friend were left at home. Catherine opened her mouth, incredulous at the reason she was hearing. She reminded Mark that this trip was planned as quality time for the 2 of them to repair their marriage, which had grown distant lately. Her mother-in-law interjected with her characteristic sharp voice. She accused Catherine of being a stingy and ungrateful wife. According to her, Catherine had plenty of money but was calculating with her in-laws. She said Amber was a sweet and polite girl, unlike the rigid Catherine, and was worth bringing along to liven things up. Amber tilted her head shyly like a cat, but her eyes shot a mocking glance at Catherine. Catherine felt her face burn. She stressed that she had paid for all the tickets and accommodation with her hard-earned money, not Mark's. She refused to pay for Amber's travel expenses. For Catherine, bringing a stranger on their couple's vacation was an insult. Mark began to get agitated. His face reddened as he felt his authority as a husband challenged in front of his mother and his girlfriend. He yelled at Catherine that a wife's duty is to obey and serve her husband, and that included treating her husband's guests with respect. Their argument began to attract the attention of passers-by in the airport. Feeling her pride trampled, Catherine said firmly that if Mark wanted to bring Amber, he had to pay her expenses, not her. Catherine also demanded that Amber leave immediately, as she didn't want another woman's presence to ruin her vacation. Hearing that, Amber began to sob quietly. Her crocodile tears further enraged the mother-in-law, who cursed Catherine, calling her a wicked, heartless woman. Unable to bear Amber's tears and his mother's anger, Mark approached Catherine without warning. His sturdy hand rose and struck Catherine's left cheek. Smack. The sound echoed loud enough to stop the movement of people around. A piercing pain instantly seized her cheek, followed by a heat that spread to her ear. Catherine staggered back, brought a hand to her throbbing cheek, and looked at Mark with incredulous eyes. In 5 years of marriage, it was the first time Mark had ever laid a hand on her. Before Catherine could process the pain, Mark slapped her a second time, harder this time, splitting the corner of her lip. He screamed in her face, saying the slaps were a lesson to teach her not to be a rebellious and arrogant wife with her fortune. The mother-in-law, far from stopping him, encouraged him, saying Catherine deserved it to learn her place. Behind Mark, Amber wore a faint smile of victory, seeing her rival humiliated in public. Fresh blood welled from the corner of Catherine's lips, staining her expensive cream-colored coat. Catherine tasted the salty tang of blood on her tongue. The physical pain was nothing compared to that of her heart shattering in that moment. In that instant, any remnant of love and respect she had for Mark vanished without a trace. Catherine didn't cry hysterically, nor did she fight back. She simply wiped the blood from her chin with the back of her hand, straightened up, and looked her husband in the eye. Her gaze turned cold, empty, and sharp. In a low but very clear voice, as if she now understood everything, she said she wouldn't argue anymore. Mark smirked cynically, thinking Catherine had finally bent and obeyed. He ordered her to check in for all of them immediately, but Catherine slowly shook her head. She said she would leave Mark, his mother, and Amber to their own devices. With biting sarcasm, she wished them a happy vacation. Then she turned and walked away with quick but firm steps, leaving the luggage cart where it was. Mark shouted Catherine's name, threatening to divorce her if she didn't come back. The threat echoed through the terminal's halls, but Catherine didn't look back for a second. Her steps carried her more firmly away from the toxins of her life. In her mind, there were no longer plans for a romantic vacation. In its place, a new, much colder and more calculating plan had emerged. As she walked, Catherine pulled out her smartphone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, accessing her banking and airline apps. The slaps had just awakened the lioness sleeping inside Catherine. She wouldn't just leave. She swore she would make them pay dearly for every drop of blood that had sprung from her lips that day. Mark watched Catherine's back grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the crowd. He snorted with disdain and adjusted the collar of his jacket with an arrogant gesture. At his side, his mother patted his shoulder, both calming and justifying Mark's violent behavior. According to his mother, a woman like Catherine needed a physical lesson from time to time so the money wouldn't go to her head. Amber, whose tears had dried in an instant, clung to Mark's arm again coquettishly. In a falsely concerned tone, she asked if they could really go to Canada. Mark laughed contemptuously. With complete confidence, he assured Amber and his mother that Catherine was just having a childish tantrum. Mark was 100% sure that Catherine loved him too much to dare cancel anything. He thought Catherine just needed some time in the restroom to cool down and would surely catch up with them later. Or call him crying to apologize. Mark took charge of the luggage cart Catherine had abandoned, feeling victorious at the thought that he now controlled even his wife's possessions. The three of them, chins held high, headed to the first-class check-in counter of the international airline. Mark felt like a king leading his entourage. He imagined the plush airplane seats, the sumptuous food, and the premium service he would soon enjoy. His mother was busy preening in the reflection of the airport windows, and Amber was taking selfies to post on social media, with a caption hinting at a luxurious vacation with her lover. The priority check-in line was empty. A woman in an impeccable uniform greeted them with a professional and friendly smile, asking for their passports and reservation number. Mark, as if he were a tycoon, placed his passport, his mother's, and Amber's on the counter, along with a piece of paper with the reservation number he had secretly photographed from Catherine's phone the night before. In an imperative tone, he told her to hurry up as his mother was tired of standing. The agent nodded politely and began typing the code into the computer system. There was a moment of silence. The agent's fingers stopped dancing on the keyboard. She frowned. She re-entered the code, this time more slowly, ensuring she hadn't made a mistake. Mark began to drum his fingers on the counter, impatient. Meanwhile, Amber started complaining that her feet hurt in her high heels. The agent looked up. Her friendly smile had been replaced by an expression of slight confusion and regret. She informed Mark that this reservation number could not be found in the system for today's flights. Mark's eyes widened. He insisted it was impossible that Catherine had made the reservation last month, and he had seen the confirmation himself. He told the agent to check again, accusing the computer system of having problems. The agent patiently explained that the reservation data existed, but the status of the tickets for all passengers included in that reservation number had been unilaterally canceled by the primary account holder about 10 minutes ago. Mark's face, which had been red with anger, turned pale in an instant. The cancellation had occurred just after Catherine left them. The impact of reality began to hit Mark's consciousness. Catherine wasn't just threatening, she had truly cut off his wings. Hearing the agent's explanation, the mother-in-law erupted in a fit of rage. She screamed hysterically at the counter, cursing the airline and uttering Catherine's name, along with crude insults. The mother-in-law's shrill voice made other passengers in the economy class line turn and whisper. Amber began to panic. She shook Mark's arm, asking what would happen to their vacation. Shame began to spread across Mark's face. He tried to calm his mother, who had started acting like a child who wasn't bought a toy. Mark quickly pulled out his phone and dialed Catherine's number. It rang once and was disconnected. He called again, and a recording informed him that the number was unavailable or out of the service area. Catherine had turned off her phone or blocked Mark's number. A cold sweat trickled down Mark's temples. He was trapped in a very embarrassing situation. He couldn't just go home, as he had bragged to his neighbors and co-workers that he was going abroad. His pride was too great to go home dragging the suitcases. Mark pulled out his wallet with trembling hands. He took out the platinum credit card he had been so proud of. In reality, it was a supplementary card issued from Catherine's main account, but Mark had always considered it his own. He told the agent he would buy 3 new tickets on the spot. The price was much more expensive for the last-minute purchase, but Mark didn't care. He was sure the card's limit was still very high. The agent swiped the card through the terminal. The machine emitted a long beep and a small receipt. The agent read it, and in a polite but firm tone, said the transaction had been declined by the issuing bank. Mark didn't believe it. He told the agent to try again. The result was the same. Declined. Mark pulled out a second card, a debit card linked to a joint account that was 90% funded by Catherine's money. The result was the same. Transaction failed. Insufficient funds or card blocked. A series of text message notifications arrived on Mark's phone. They were from the bank informing him that at the request of the primary client, his access to the credit and debit cards had been deactivated for security reasons. In a matter of minutes, Catherine had completely paralyzed them financially. In the middle of that grand airport, Mark felt small. He stood rigidly with his wallet open, which now only contained a couple of useless plastic cards and a few dollar bills, not enough to buy even a domestic plane ticket, let alone one to Canada. His mother-in-law made things worse. She started wailing, accusing the airport staff of conspiring with her daughter-in-law to mistreat an old woman. Airport security officers began to approach as the commotion she was causing was disrupting public order. Amber abruptly let go of Mark's hand. Her sweet face had soured. She demanded that Mark do something and not embarrass her like this. Amber had to get on a plane today, no matter what. Mark tried to open his mobile banking app to check his personal balance, which he had been saving little by little from the allowance Catherine gave him. The number that appeared on the screen left him helpless. The balance was $0. Apparently, Catherine, using a power of attorney Mark had signed in the past without reading the contents, had reclaimed all the funds she had transferred to his personal account. The 3 of them were now stranded by the check-in counter. The large suitcases, which once seemed imposing, now looked like a heavy burden mocking their helplessness. People in line began to look at them with disdain and disgust, especially after hearing the mother-in-law's rude shouts. Mark felt his world collapsing. He had no tickets, no money, and no way to contact Catherine. The vacation of his dreams had turned into a nightmare before the plane even took off. In the distance, Mark thought he saw the ghost of Catherine smiling coldly, enjoying the ruin that had just begun. Catherine silently entered the VIP lounge, a restricted area for ordinary passengers. The atmosphere inside was like a different world miles away from the chaos she had just left behind. The air was scented with a subtle lavender aroma, and the air conditioning was set to a perfect temperature. It was nothing like the suffocating air thick with sweat and emotions in the departure hall. The receptionist at the entrance greeted her warmly. As Catherine was a top-tier priority member cardholder, she didn't have to waste time verifying her identity and was respectfully called by her name. Catherine nodded silently with a faint smile. As the corner of her lips split by Mark's slap was sore, she chose a single sofa with a direct view of the runway where massive planes prepared to carry people's dreams to different parts of the world. After sitting down and resting her stiff back, an attendant brought her a refreshing orange-colored mocktail and a hot towel. Catherine took the towel and slowly applied it to her still-throbbing cheek. The warm sensation slightly eased the physical pain, but her mind became even clearer to map out her plans. She took a tablet out of her purse. Her fingers moved nimbly, revoking all financial access linked to Mark. One by one block notifications appeared on the screen. The supplementary credit card, the debit card, and the mobile banking access she had provided based on marital trust were now completely blocked. No more flow of funds for the parasite. After securing her finances, Catherine opened another airline's app. She booked a first-class ticket to Vancouver, departing in 2 hours. This ticket was in the name of one person, Catherine, with no Mark, no mother-in-law, no Amber. While Catherine enjoyed the serenity on the luxurious sofa, watching the planes take off, a contrasting scene was unfolding in the public area of the airport. Mark, his mother, and Amber were now stranded near a large pillar outside the check-in area. They looked like disaster victims lost in the middle of the lavish airport. The large suitcases they had brought had become a painful burden. The mother-in-law was sitting on one of them, her face flushed. She fanned herself briskly with her hand as if trying to ward off the humiliation that was beginning to surround them. Amber stood restlessly, biting her nails. She constantly looked around, afraid that someone would recognize them after the earlier scandal. Hunger began to set in as they hadn't eaten anything since morning, expecting the delicious food in the VIP lounge that Mark had promised them. But that hope had vanished. Mark paced back and forth with his phone glued to his ear. His face was tense, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He was desperately looking for someone to lend him money. He called his friend Carlos, whom he often treated to drinks with Catherine's money. But when Mark expressed his intention to borrow $5,000 to buy tickets, Carlos hung up with the excuse that he was in the middle of a home renovation. Mark called his co-worker, Fernando. Fernando instead laughed and joked about why the husband of a rich woman like Catherine needed to borrow pocket change. He went through all the contacts on his phone, but one by one they rejected him. Mark realized how insignificant he was in the eyes of others without the label of his wife's wealth. His friends had approached him not out of loyalty to him but for Catherine's money. Desperate, Mark returned to his mother and his mistress. He shook his head helplessly, indicating he hadn't secured any money. The mother-in-law erupted in anger again. She hit Mark's arm with her purse, accusing him of being a useless husband who couldn't control his own wife. The mother-in-law lamented her fate, imagining the shame she would have to endure, explaining to her neighbors why she had returned after bragging about going abroad. Amber, who had been quiet until now, started to complain. She complained that she was thirsty, hungry, and her legs ached from standing so long. She demanded that Mark buy her a drink from the airport cafe. Mark reached into his pants pocket and pulled out his now thin leather wallet. He only had $100 in cash left. If he bought 3 bottles of water and some sandwiches at the airport, the remaining money would vanish in the blink of an eye. In the VIP lounge, Catherine opened her social media. She posted a simple but meaningful photo, her passport, and her new boarding pass on a marble table with the mocktail and the view of the planes in the background. She wrote a short caption. "Flying solo without the baggage is so much lighter. Goodbye, New York. Hello, Vancouver." The post received hundreds of reactions in minutes. Catherine's friends, business partners, and even old acquaintances left supportive comments. It was as if they had been waiting a long time for the moment Catherine would break free from Mark. Catherine felt a sense of relief reading the comments. For all this time, she had turned a deaf ear to her friends' warnings about Mark's true nature, and now their support strengthened her resolve. But it wasn't just Catherine's post that went viral. Unbeknownst to Mark and his group busy arguing in a corner of the airport, an amateur video began to go viral on TikTok and Twitter. The video had been recorded by a passenger who happened to be nearby when Mark slapped Catherine. The video's title was very provocative. "Crazy husband assaults millionaire wife at JFK to defend mistress." The 2-minute video clearly showed Mark's ferocious face as he slapped Catherine, the mother-in-law's scowling face, hurling insults, and Amber's false innocence hiding behind Mark. The video unequivocally demonstrated how dignified Catherine's response was and how cruel the treatment she received was. The social media algorithm worked quickly. The video began to be shared thousands of times, sparking the outrage of American netizens, known for being combative when defending victims of infidelity and violence. Mark, still arguing with his mother-in-law about whether to take a taxi or a bus, didn't know that his face was now on the screens of millions of smartphones. He still considered himself a victim of a disobedient wife. Mustering the pride he had left, Mark decided to take his group home. But a new problem arose. The airport taxis didn't accept delayed payments, and his ride-sharing app was linked to the credit card Catherine had already blocked. They had to find a way back to their luxurious house without being sure if they still had the keys. Mark looked at the airport exit with a blank stare. The dream of seeing the snow in Canada had turned into the reality of the heat and grime of New York, ready to swallow them whole. The path out of the airport was like walking on hot coals for Mark. The 3 of them trudged toward the regular taxi stand, dragging their large suitcases. There was no more laughter or arrogance, only tired faces and bitter hearts. When they reached the front of the taxi line, the driver refused to take them without the guarantee of a cash payment. The distance to Greenwich, Connecticut, the exclusive neighborhood where they lived, was considerable, and the tolls weren't cheap. Reluctantly, Mark took off the chronograph watch he wore. It was a high-end replica he had bought to show off. He offered it to an unlicensed cab driver, soliciting customers in a corner. After a humiliating haggle, the watch sold for a mere $300. It was enough for the taxi and tolls, but with nothing left over. They finally got into an old taxi whose air conditioning barely worked. Mark sat in the front seat next to the driver, while his mother-in-law and Amber squeezed into the back. The atmosphere in the car was suffocatingly silent, only interrupted by the noisy engine. Amber, bored and seeking validation, pulled out her phone to check social media. She expected to find some sympathy, or at least see photos of other people's vacations. But as soon as she opened Instagram, her eyes widened. The notifications on her account had exploded into the thousands. The number of followers had increased dramatically, but not for her achievements. The comments section of her last photo, one from the airport with the caption "Vacay with my love," was filled with insults. Harsh words like homewrecker, cheap woman, shameless mistress, gold digger flooded the screen. Amber trembled. She opened her direct messages. The content was even more horrific. Threats, curses, and even screenshots of the video from the airport incident were sent to her. Netizens with a skill worthy of cyber detectives had quickly located her social media accounts. Amber's identity was completely exposed. Her workplace, her old apartment address, and even unflattering photos from her past began to circulate. Amber screamed hysterically in the taxi, making the driver almost swerve in shock. She threw the phone into her mother-in-law's lap. The bewildered old woman picked it up and read the comments. Her aged face turned pale. Not only Amber, but the Facebook account the mother-in-law used to show off to her bridge club friends was also under attack. In old photos of the mother-in-law with Catherine, netizens commented, "Devil mother-in-law and old witch." The mother-in-law's reputation in her neighborhood had collapsed in an instant. The veil of a wise mother she had built had been torn, exposing her flaws to the public. Mark immediately opened his own phone. His situation was much worse. His identity as an abusive husband had already spread across several high-reach gossip accounts. The video of the slap had been replayed millions of times in slow motion, showing how cruel he had been. Netizens even tagged the social media account of the company where Mark worked, demanding the dismissal of an employee who committed violence against women. Mark felt the world spinning. He tried to delete his account, but his hands were shaking too much. It was too late. Digital footprints are not so easily erased. On the other side of the world, or more accurately in the sky, on a connecting flight, Catherine activated the first-class Wi-Fi service. She watched the commotion unfolding in her home country with a smile of cold satisfaction. She didn't need to hire an army of trolls or spend money to attack Mark. Karma and Mark's own stupidity had mobilized the masses. Catherine decided to do a short live stream on Instagram. She adjusted her scarf and, without filters, so the bruise on the corner of her lips was clearly visible, greeted her followers. "Hello everyone," she said in a soft but firm voice. "Thank you for your prayers and support. I'm okay. I'm going to a place where I can find peace again. This wound on my face," Catherine continued, gently touching her cheek, "will heal. But the wound of betrayal will probably take longer. I just want to tell you to never be afraid to leave a place that harms you, even if it means flying solo." The live stream was watched by tens of thousands of people simultaneously. Public sympathy poured out for Catherine. In the comments section, many lawyers offered free legal assistance. Many women shared similar stories, and the moral support was overwhelming. Catherine ended the stream gracefully, without insulting Mark even once, which ironically worsened his image even more, making him seem like a man who had hurt a woman as good as Catherine. Back on the highway outside New York in the hot taxi, Mark's phone rang. The name Mr. Evans appeared on the screen. Mark's heart stopped for a moment. Mr. Evans was his direct boss and a close friend of Catherine's late father. With sweaty hands, Mark answered the call. Mr. Evans' voice on the other end was cold, firm, and unforgiving. Mark, the boss's voice, boomed even through the phone. "I just saw the video that's circulating. What a disappointment. Our company does not tolerate acts of violence, especially against one's own wife. Keeping someone like you could damage the company's image." "Mr. Evans, this is a misunderstanding. Can I explain?" Mark tried to interrupt. "There's nothing to explain," Mr. Evans cut him off. "The video evidence is clear. As of this moment, you are terminated with cause. The official termination letter has been sent to your email and a copy to your home. Don't bother setting foot in the company again. I've already instructed the security team to prevent you from entering if you come. And one more thing. Return all company assets via courier by tomorrow, or I will report you for embezzlement." The call was unilaterally disconnected. Mark dropped the phone to the car floor. He sat there stunned. His gaze was fixed on the traffic ahead. Fired. He had just lost his only source of personal income at a time when he didn't have a single dollar. He was in debt and hated by the whole country. In the back seat, his mother was still crying over her reputation, and Amber was busy deleting her photos while cursing the netizens. The three of them were in a metal box speeding toward total ruin. Meanwhile, the wife they had hurt was flying high above the clouds, leaving them to rot in the consequences of their own actions. The old taxi pulled up in front of a tall black gate that separated the public road from the expansive grounds of a luxurious Mediterranean-style villa. A fine drizzle was beginning to fall, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. It was as if nature itself were crying or perhaps laughing at the fate of the three disheveled humans who had just stepped out of the car. Mark paid the driver with the last of his cash, dismissing him without a single cent for a tip. As the taxi's wheels drove away, a suffocating silence enveloped them. Before them stood the castle they had always been proud of, the place where Mark felt like a king, and his mother, the Queen Mother. But something was different today. The garden lights, which usually came on automatically on a cloudy day, were off, and the house appeared completely dark, in contrast to the brightly lit homes of the neighbors. Mark approached the digital lock panel embedded in the gate pillar. With a motion that had become muscle memory, his fingers keyed in the combination of his birth date, the password that for years had been the key to his earthly paradise. A long, low-toned beep sounded, followed by a rapid blinking of a red light. Access denied. Mark frowned. He thought he had mistyped it due to nerves. He tried again, this time more slowly, pressing each number firmly. The result was the same. The red light flashed again, mocking his efforts. Mark began to panic. He tried the backup password, his mother's birthday, and then their wedding anniversary. All failed. The iron gate did not move solid, protecting what was inside from its now disgraced former master. His mother, impatient, began to scold Mark to stop playing around and open the gate as the drizzle was turning into a heavier rain. Amber, her makeup starting to run, stood with her arms crossed, shivering. Her eyes fixed on a pile of cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly outside the fence next to the security booth. The pile was precariously covered with a blue tarp to protect it from the moisture, but the edges were spattered with mud. A bad feeling crept into Amber's mind. She touched Mark's arm and pointed to the pile with her chin. Before Mark could inspect the boxes, the small door of the security booth opened. Out came Mr. Peterson, the security guard, who had worked at the house since the time of Catherine's late father. Normally, Mr. Peterson would greet Mark with respect, bowing and opening the gate, but this time Mr. Peterson stood tall in his impeccable uniform. His face was flat without a smile, and his gaze was sharp. In his hands, he held a clipboard with documents. Mr. Peterson did not open the gate. Instead, he stood in the way to block access to the panel, positioning himself as a wall between Mark and the house. Mark yelled at Mr. Peterson, ordering him to open the gate immediately and asking who had dared to change the code to his own house. Mr. Peterson calmly replied that he was only following the orders of the legal owner of the house. Mark became even more enraged. He shouted that he was the owner's husband, therefore he was also the owner. Mr. Peterson slowly shook his head and handed him a copy of the documents he held. They were a copy of the property deed for the house and land entirely in Catherine's name, and a newly issued legal declaration that day ordering the eviction of occupants with no ownership stake. Mark snatched the papers. His eyes widened as he read the lines of legal jargon that invalidated his rights. It was specified that Mark had not a single cent of right to that property thanks to a prenuptial agreement he had hastily signed in the past, blinded by Catherine's love and wealth. The rain was now falling harder, soaking the paper in Mark's hands and making the ink run as if trying to erase Mark's existence from the history of that house. The mother-in-law, who had peeked at the contents of the letter, felt her legs give way. She collapsed onto the wet, dirty asphalt. Mr. Peterson pointed to the pile of boxes outside the fence. He explained that Mrs. Catherine had ordered the household staff to pack all of Mark's and his mother's personal belongings. Clothes, shoes, even the smallest trinket. Everything had been taken out, leaving nothing behind. On the other hand, valuables such as paintings, luxury furniture, and expensive electronics, being Catherine's property, remained inside. Mr. Peterson emphasized that they were strictly forbidden from setting foot beyond the gate. If they tried to force their way in, Mr. Peterson had instructions to press an emergency button connected directly to the nearest police station for trespassing. The mother-in-law screamed hysterically. She crawled to the pile of boxes and began to tear it apart wildly, looking for a collection of antique ceramics she claimed as hers, although it had actually been bought with Catherine's money. She discovered that one of the ceramic pieces had broken inside the box due to careless packing. The mother-in-law's wails erupted in the rain. She lamented her fate, thrown out like a stray cat while hugging the ceramic fragments as if they were the corpse of her child. Seeing the chaos, Amber began to lose her patience. She didn't care about ceramics or property deeds. What mattered to her was that she was soaked cold and hungry. Amber started cursing. Mark. Her flirtatious voice transformed into a harsh scream. She called him a useless man, a fraud, and poor. Amber yelled that she regretted joining the vacation, only to end up homeless like this. She kicked a puddle, splashing mud on Mark's pants. Amber said she would simply go back to her own apartment. She didn't want to share the suffering. She turned to look for another taxi, although she didn't know how she would pay for it. Seeing that Amber was about to leave Mark at his lowest emotional point felt abandoned. He ran after Amber and grabbed her roughly by the wrist. Mark shouted in the rain, his eyes filled with anger and desperation. He reminded Amber that she was one of the causes of this ruin. He said he wouldn't let her escape just like that after she had enjoyed his money. He said if they were kicked out together, she had to suffer with him too. Mark's grip was so strong that Amber whimpered in pain. Their fight became a free show for Mr. Peterson, who stood firm behind the gate. Curious neighbors began to peek from behind the curtains of their windows. Mark, his mother, and Amber were now social outcasts, stranded on the street without a roof, without money, and without dignity. They finally dragged their wet boxes and found shelter under the awning of an empty storefront, not far from the residential complex, waiting for a miracle that would not come in the middle of the intensifying storm. The night grew deeper, and the cold air chilled them to the bone. After walking a considerable distance, dragging the suitcases and the few boxes they could still salvage, Mark finally found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. The building looked dreary with peeling paint on the walls and a neon sign that read, "Motel," flickering faintly, as if it didn't want to welcome guests. With the little money they managed to scrape together from his mother's pockets and the wallet Amber reluctantly produced, they could barely afford a cramped room for the night. It was the lowest category room, damp, with a stale smell of tobacco and only one double bed with yellowish sheets. As soon as the door opened, a musty smell hit their noses. Amber immediately covered her nose with an undisguised expression of disgust. She refused to sit on the edge of the bed, fearing that mites or germs would stick to her designer clothes. The mother-in-law, extremely tired, no longer cared. She dropped onto the bed, taking up almost 3/4 of it. Seeing this, Amber immediately protested. She yelled that she didn't want to sleep on the cold, dirty floor. She demanded that her mother-in-law make room for her. The mother-in-law, in a very bad mood, didn't back down. She yelled at Amber that she should respect her elders. She threw in her face that it was her fault, Catherine, got angry, and kicked them out. If Amber hadn't accompanied them, the mother-in-law would probably still be sleeping in her plush king-sized bed in the Greenwich house. Hearing the accusation, Amber exploded. The mask of a sweet, submissive woman she had worn in front of the mother-in-law shattered. Amber retorted with harsh words, calling the mother-in-law a greedy old woman who only wanted to live comfortably at the expense of others. Amber said the mother-in-law had also enjoyed the money Mark gave her, so she shouldn't hypocritically blame her. A shameful fight over sleeping space broke out. Amber pulled the blanket covering the mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law grabbed Amber's wet hair. They rolled on the musty bed, scratching and cursing each other like stray cats fighting over scraps. Mark could only sit on a creaky wooden chair in a corner of the room holding his head, which felt like it was about to burst. He watched the two women he had defended to the hilt at the airport now hurting each other in a cheap motel. The scene hit him hard. Was this the happiness for which he had sacrificed his loyal wife? Amid the uproar, Mark's gaze fell on an old rotary phone on the wall near the dresser with the broken mirror. A crazy idea crossed his mind. Maybe, just maybe, Catherine still had some compassion left. Maybe her heart would soften upon hearing Mark's pleading voice. Mark approached the phone, realizing he couldn't make an international call directly from the motel phone without a deposit. But he remembered he had an international calling card he had bought for work, the code for which he kept in his wallet. With trembling hands, he dialed the access code and then Catherine's personal cell number, which he knew by heart. The phone rang. Mark's heart pounded. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Mark was about to hang up in despair, but suddenly he heard a voice. Hello. Catherine's voice was clear, calm, and in the background, the crackling of wood could be heard the sound of a fireplace. A lump formed in Mark's throat. He could imagine Catherine sitting on a leather sofa in a warm wooden cabin in the Whistler Mountains, perhaps with a cup of hot chocolate in her hand. Outside, the snow would be falling beautifully, a stark contrast to Mark in a smelly room with the screams of his mother and mistress in the background. Catherine, it's me. Mark's voice was hoarse and sounded pathetic. Honey, please. I'm sorry. We have nowhere to live. My mother is sick. Amber, she regrets it too. Please help us. Open the door to the house or at least send us some money so we can eat. I'll fix everything. I promise. I'll divorce Amber if you want. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then came a small light laugh. It wasn't a mocking, harsh laugh, but the light laugh of someone who has truly shed a weight. "I'm sorry, who is this?" Catherine asked in a deliberately neutral tone. "My husband died this morning at the airport, along with my interest in him. And the people you mention, I don't know them. I have no obligation to feed strangers, especially poor ones with no manners." Mark tried to plead again. Tears began to well in his eyes. "Catherine, don't be so cruel. I'm your husband." Ex-husband Catherine corrected him sharply. "Enjoy your night in the hell you've created, Mr. Mark. Oh, and this cabin is really warm as my happy feelings watching you fall apart." Click. The call was disconnected. The monotonous dial tone sounded like the death sentence for Mark's last hope. He slowly hung up the receiver. His body slid to the cold floor. Meanwhile, on the bed, the fight between his mother and Amber had ceased due to exhaustion. The mother-in-law finally fell asleep in a fetal position, hugging her purse and snoring loudly from physical and mental exhaustion. Amber was sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and swollen, a look of hatred fixed on Mark's back. She had heard the phone call. She had heard that Mark was willing to divorce her for Catherine's money. Amber's heart froze. She realized there was no love here, only self-interest. And now this ship had sunk. She had to save herself. Amber's eyes fell on the mother-in-law's ring finger hanging loosely by the pillow. There, an old gold ring with a red ruby shone. It was the only genuine piece of jewelry the mother-in-law owned, an inheritance from her late husband, that she never took off, not even to bathe. Amber swallowed. Her cunning mind worked quickly. That ring could surely be sold for a few $1,000s. Enough money for a ticket back to her hometown, or at least to get a new apartment and survive for a week. Amber looked at Mark, who was still on the floor, stunned, lamenting his fate. Slowly and very carefully, Amber approached her mother-in-law. Her slender fingers moved slowly like a snake and touched the old woman's wrinkled fingers. The mother-in-law moved slightly, and Amber held her breath, but the snoring resumed. Amber continued her action. She slightly moistened the mother-in-law's finger with a bit of saliva to make it slip, and then slowly pulled the ring. 1 millimeter. 2 millimeters. The ring came off. Amber squeezed it tightly in her fist. Her heart was pounding. She tucked the ring deep into her pants pocket. Amber sat up straight again. She pretended to massage her legs while planning her escape at dawn when Mark and his mother were still asleep. She would not go down with this pair of idiots. She was an expert survivor, and tonight she would escape as far as possible with the only remaining possession of that shattered family. Dawn broke reluctantly on the eastern horizon, filtering a gloomy gray light through the cracks in the dirty, dusty motel curtains. Inside the cramped, smelly room, the morning silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint snores of the mother-in-law who was still asleep, perhaps dreaming of a past where she was still a respected matriarch. Mark sat on the floor, his back against the cold wall. He hadn't slept all night, and his eyes were swollen and red. His mind wandered aimlessly, filled with late regrets and fear of a dark future. Beside him, Amber was already awake. The woman moved with extreme care, trying not to make the slightest noise as she put on her shoes. Her eyes were alert, glancing alternately at Mark and his mother, making sure no one noticed her malicious intentions to flee that morning. Her right hand occasionally patted her pants pocket, checking that the gold ring with the ruby was still safely there. It was her ticket to freedom. The capital to start a new life, away from the family she now considered useless trash. But before Amber could even touch the doorknob to escape, a loud bang shook their motel room door. Bang! The thin wooden door trembled violently, as if kicked by a giant. Mark jumped, his heart nearly leaping out of his chest. The mother-in-law woke up with a hysterical scream, not understanding what was happening. Amber backed away in fear, her face pale. Before they could process the situation, a second harder kick hit the door, breaking the hinges. The door swung wide open, hitting the wall, and 3 burly, menacing-looking men entered the small room. Their aura emanated a palpable threat. One of them, a man with a scar on his left cheek and a dragon tattoo peeking out from the collar of his black t-shirt, looked at Mark with a cruel smile that chilled his blood. They were loan sharks, debt collectors from an illegal loan and online gambling syndicate that had been tormenting Mark's life. Mark trembled violently. He had successfully hidden this dark side of his life from Catherine. He had become addicted to online slots a year ago, hoping to multiply his allowance to maintain Amber's lavish lifestyle. When he lost, he borrowed money from illegal loan apps and usurers with killer interest rates covering it with money he secretly took from Catherine's accounts. Now that his access to Catherine's money was cut off, the time bomb had exploded. These debt collectors must have tracked his phone's location, which had been briefly turned on when Mark called Catherine the night before. The GPS signal had led these predators directly to their dying prey. The tattooed man wasted no time. He stepped forward, grabbed Mark by the collar of his shirt, and lifted his thin body until his feet barely touched the floor. He shouted harshly at him to pay his debt, which amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars, including principal and interest. Mark tried to speak, but his voice was stuck in his throat, and he could only manage a squeaking sound, begging for time and mercy. But mercy was not in these thugs' vocabulary. A powerful punch landed in Mark's stomach, making him double over in pain and fall to the floor, vomiting bile from his empty stomach. The mother-in-law screamed hysterically, seeing her only son being beaten in front of her. She tried to get up to help, but one of the loan shark's henchmen yelled at her to stay still, or she would be next. Amid the chaos, Amber saw an opportunity. The thugs' attention was focused on Mark, who had become their human punching bag. Slowly and stealthily, Amber crept towards the open door. She thought this was her golden opportunity. She didn't care if Mark died or was crippled. The important thing was that she survived, but fate had other plans. Just as Amber was about to slip out, one of the thugs guarding the door noticed her movement. The man quickly grabbed Amber's long hair and dragged her back into the room. Amber screamed in pain, struggling to be released. During the struggle, the man grabbed her wrist and felt a hard object inside her pants pocket. Suspecting the woman was hiding something valuable, the man forcibly searched her pocket. Out came the gold ring with the ruby. The man held it up, mocking her. "You think you can pay even the interest on Mark's debt with this?" he asked. The mother-in-law's eyes widened upon seeing her precious ring, the relic of her late husband, which should have been on her finger now in the hands of a thug taken from Amber's pocket. The revelation hit the mother-in-law with the force of a lightning bolt. The woman she had praised as the ideal daughter-in-law and defended to the death in front of Catherine was actually a thief. The mother-in-law's fury overcame her fear. She got up from the bed and pounced on Amber with her sharp nails. She didn't care about the thugs around her. Her only goal was to destroy Amber. In that small room, a tragic and ironic scene unfolded. Mark groaned in pain under the thug's boots, while his mother and mistress fought on the bed. The mother-in-law pulled Amber's hair, calling her a thief and a prostitute. Amber, cornered, didn't hold back. She scratched the mother-in-law's face, screaming that she was a stupid old woman who deserved to be deceived. The ring flew into a corner of the room, rolling ownerless. The thugs laughed at the drama of a broken family unfolding before their eyes. The tattooed man even recorded the scene with his phone, thinking of using it later as a blackmail tool. They began to rummage through the bags and suitcases, taking phones, watches, and what little money was left, considering it an initial seizure. The chaos reached its climax when police car sirens were heard approaching and stopping right in front of the motel. The thugs looked at each other, their faces transformed by panic. They knew that getting involved with the police for a serious assault case would be a problem for their boss's business. They quickly spat on Mark one last time, kicked a random suitcase, and fled through the motel's back door, leaving behind a bruised and shattered Mark, mother-in-law, and Amber. With the last shred of consciousness, Mark felt a ray of hope. He thought a motel neighbor had called the police because of the thug's ruckus. He thought the police would save him, take him to the hospital, and protect him. He struggled to his feet, crawling towards the door with a bruised face and bleeding split lips. When two police officers in blue uniforms appeared in the doorway, Mark raised a trembling hand, tried to smile, and said in a low voice, "Help me, officers." They tried to kill me, but the officers didn't smile back. Their faces were cold, firm, and devoid of empathy. One of the officers pulled out an official document and a pair of silver handcuffs that gleamed in the morning sun. The officer read a sentence that turned Mark's last hope to dust. "Mark Garcia, we are the police. You are under arrest as a suspect in the crime of domestic violence against your wife, Catherine Lopez. This is based on the complaint received, the medical report, and the video evidence that has circulated. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mark's jaw dropped. His brain couldn't process the information. What had arrived was not a rescue, but a cold prison cell. Behind him, his mother, her face covered in scratches from Amber's nails, looked at the police in terror. Amber, sitting in a corner of the room clutching clumps of her torn-out hair, also turned pale. Another officer entered and said that the mother-in-law and Amber also had to accompany them to the station to give statements as eyewitnesses. And if it was proven that they had benefited from the proceeds of Mark's crime, they could face charges of complicity or receiving stolen property. That morning ended with Mark being led out of the motel in handcuffs under the gaze of the other motel guests and curious neighbors who had gathered. Instead of going to the airport for a winter vacation, he limped towards a patrol car that would take him to a cold, suffocating cell. The sky above him was darkly overcast, as if the gates of mercy were closing for a husband who for a momentary pleasure had betrayed the sincere heart of his wife, and now that act had become a deadly poison. Time passed slowly, like water dripping in a cave. 3 months had passed since the incident at the airport and the arrest at the sordid motel. Today was Mark's sentencing day. The courtroom at the New York County Supreme Courthouse was exceptionally cold. The air conditioning hummed monotonously, spreading a smell of disinfectant and a suffocating tension. Mark sat at the defendant's table. His bright orange prison jumpsuit contrasted sharply with his now dull skin and emaciated body. His hair, once always impeccable with expensive gel, was now roughly shaved. His face was gaunt, and the dark circles under his eyes revealed the poor quality of sleep behind bars. He kept his head bowed deeply, not daring to look at the public gallery. The courtroom doors opened, and the atmosphere changed in an instant. Catherine entered, accompanied by a team of top lawyers, famous for never having lost a major case. Catherine's appearance was stunning, completely different from the bruised and bloodied woman at the airport 3 months ago. She wore an elegant navy blue suit jacket, paired with a softly patterned silk scarf. Her face glowed with health, radiating the aura of a successful woman who had reclaimed her power. There was no trace of sadness in her eyes, only a serenity as vast as the ocean ready to engulf her opponent. She walked with her back straight and sat gracefully at the victim's witness bench, as if the wooden courtroom bench were her queen's throne. The judge banged his gavel, starting the trial. The witnesses were called one by one. Here began the real drama of betrayal, a spectacle of cornered rats biting each other to survive. The first witness to be called was the mother-in-law. The old woman limped to the stand. She looked much older than her age. Her gray hair was no longer dyed, and her clothes were humble. When the prosecutor asked her about the violence incident at the airport and if she knew about her son's habitual violent behavior, the mother-in-law did something that broke Mark's heart into 1,000 pieces, shedding crocodile tears. The mother-in-law testified under oath that she was just an old, helpless, and ignorant mother. She claimed that Mark had forced her all this time to hate Catherine. "I was afraid of my son, Your Honor," the mother-in-law sobbed with a trembling voice dramatized to the maximum. "Mark has a terrible temper. If I didn't follow his wishes to hate Catherine, he would yell at me. I actually loved Catherine, but I was being coerced by Mark. He forced me to go to the airport and insult Catherine. I am a victim of an ungrateful son, Your Honor." Mark looked at his mother with wide eyes. He wanted to scream and deny all those lies. He wanted to remind his mother that she was the one who always whispered in his ear that Catherine was stingy, that a wife should obey, that Catherine's money was his right. But his lawyer pressed his shoulder, signaling him to be quiet. Mark felt a pain sharper than the punches from the thugs. His own mother, the person he had defended even by hitting his wife, was now throwing him away like trash to avoid justice as an accomplice to psychological violence. Instead of defending the son who had sacrificed everything for her, the mother-in-law chose to save her own wrinkled skin. The next witness was Amber, the ex-coworker and mistress who had been the source of it all. Amber entered with her head bowed, dressed in modest, simple clothes, trying to create an image of an innocent, lost woman. Amber's testimony was equally devastating. Before the judge, Amber stated that at first, she didn't know Mark was a married man, a lie so big it made Catherine smirk cynically from her seat. She said Mark had introduced himself as a rich divorcee looking for a life partner. "I was deceived, Your Honor," Amber said in a low voice. "Mark promised me a life of luxury and trips abroad. I didn't know the money was the result of exploiting his wife. If I had known, I would never have wanted him. I am also a victim of this man's lies." Amber pinned all the blame on Mark. She denied participating in heating up the atmosphere at the airport. She denied insulting Catherine. She painted herself as a naive girl who had fallen for Mark's manipulation. Mark glared at Amber, the woman who used to flirt with him, the one who told him, "I'll love you forever, baby," when he bought her a designer handbag. Now she was stabbing a dagger directly into his heart in front of a court. There was no love or loyalty. It was all fake, as plastic as a credit card, with no funds at the airport. Mark realized how stupid he had been to trade Catherine a real diamond for Amber, a pebble that was now stoning him to death. When it was Catherine's turn to give her additional testimony, the atmosphere instantly became silent. Catherine didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't curse. She simply presented a thick folder of documents to the judge. It wasn't just evidence of domestic violence. It was new evidence of something much more serious: embezzlement of company assets. It turned out that while she was in Canada, she had ordered a team of independent auditors to investigate the finances of the real estate company inherited from her father, where Mark held the position of operations manager. The audit results were appalling. It was discovered that Mark had embezzled millions of dollars from the company's funds over the past 2 years, falsifying vendor information and inflating renovation costs. The money was used to fund Mark's online gambling addiction and the lifestyle of Amber and his mother. Mr. Evans, the company's CEO and Catherine's uncle, also testified as a prosecution witness in this embezzlement case. "This is no longer a domestic matter," Catherine said, looking the judge in the eye calmly but sharply. "This is a pure crime. The defendant has not only caused me physical harm, but has stolen the rights of my employees, manipulated my family's trust, and destroyed the company's integrity. I am not seeking revenge, but the most equitable justice so there are no more victims." Mark slumped in his chair, powerless. A cold sweat ran down his back. He knew his life was over. The domestic violence case alone could land him in prison for years. With the large-scale embezzlement case added, he would probably rot in a cell for the rest of his youth. He looked around the room. His mother averted her gaze, pretending to rummage through her purse. Amber stared at the floor, avoiding his gaze. And Catherine looked directly at him. It was no longer a look of love or hate. It was the look one gives to a pathetic, pitiful stranger. The judge banged his gavel, declaring a recess to deliberate the verdict. But the aura of defeat had already completely enveloped Mark. As the officers led him back to the temporary holding cell, Mark crossed paths with Catherine in the hallway. Mark wanted to open his mouth, wanted to apologize, wanted to beg, but his tongue was stuck to the roof of his mouth. Catherine stopped for a moment, just a few feet away from him. The scent of her perfume floated gently, the scent of success he could no longer reach. "You know, Mark," she whispered, her voice like the winter wind that chills to the bone. "I might have died for you before, but now seeing how your mother and your mistress betray you, I've realized. Your heaviest punishment isn't prison. Your heaviest punishment is living, knowing you abandoned the only person who truly loved you, for people who won't even deign to look you in the face when you're in trouble. Enjoy your solitude." Catherine left. The sound of her heels clack-clack faded into the distance, leaving Mark like a stone statue, tears finally welling up. Tears of remorse that no longer had any value. The iron door of the holding cell slammed shut behind him, with a thunderous sound locking Mark in the darkness of a fate he had designed himself. The main courtroom fell silent again, but this time the silence felt much heavier and more oppressive, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out by the climactic tension. The presiding judge, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and an air of unassailable authority, adjusted his black robe before reading the sentence. Mark sat at the defendant's table, increasingly hunched over. Cold sweat soaked his back, seeping through the orange prison jumpsuit. Behind him, the public gallery was filled with journalists and onlookers, curious about the end of the airport husband drama. Catherine sat silently in the front row with her lawyer staring intently at the judge, expressionless as if witnessing the reading of a boring business report rather than the fate of her ex-husband. The judge's voice broke the silence, reading the verdict in a flat but firm tone that resonated throughout the room. Based on the irrefutable evidence, including the medical report of Mrs. Catherine Lopez's injuries, the viral video recording, witness testimonies, and the evidence from the forensic audit of the company's finances, this court finds the defendant, Mark Garcia, has been proven clearly and convincingly to have committed continuous acts of domestic violence, both physical and psychological, and the crime of embezzlement of company funds. Therefore, the court sentences the defendant to a term of 12 years in prison and imposes an obligation to pay a fine and damages of $5 million to the company. If not paid, the defendant's personal assets will be seized by the state and the prison term will be extended. The gavel struck 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was like a death knell for Mark's future. His legs gave way. He almost slid off the chair, if not for the prison guard beside him. 12 years. His youth would vanish behind bars. He would get out as an old man with nothing. No assets, no career, no family. The sentence also included the confiscation of all remaining assets in Mark's name. His car, which he hadn't even finished paying for his sports motorcycle, and even the balance of his personal account already empty, were seized to cover a tiny fraction of the money he had stolen. Mark was officially and legally completely bankrupt. He turned, searching for his mother's or Amber's face, hoping for a glimpse of compassion. But the witness bench was empty. They had fled before the sentence was read, fearing further involvement. Outside the courthouse, Amber's fate was no better. The woman tried to sneak out a side door to avoid reporters, but her face, which had become too famous on social media, was easily recognizable. A group of women, outraged by the video of her at the airport, shouted at Amber and threw empty water bottles and food scraps at her. Amber ran frantically down the main street, crying with humiliation and fear. But Amber's suffering was just beginning. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, not with consoling friends, but with unknown numbers threatening her. Because Mark and Amber had often lent each other their personal data, the online illegal loan collectors who had used her social security number began to pursue her. Amber tried to go back to her luxury apartment, but in front of the door, her belongings had been thrown out by the landlord in large black trash bags. The landlord, a firm woman who didn't want her place contaminated, evicted her on the spot after some unknown thugs looking for Amber caused a disturbance. Amber also received a termination email from her job for damaging the institution's reputation. Jobless, homeless, and pursued by debt, the once arrogant and coquettish Amber now wandered the streets of New York. She tried to contact her friends, but all their numbers had blocked her. No one wanted to take in the viral mistress who could bring trouble. In the end, Amber was seen crying at a street food stall, lamenting her fate with the last $50 in her hand, realizing her beauty couldn't save her from the ruin she herself had sown. Meanwhile, karma for the mother-in-law came in a silent but painful way. After giving false testimony against her own son in court, the mother-in-law was kicked out by a distant relative she was temporarily staying with. They were ashamed to have a relative who had gone viral as an evil mother-in-law and a traitor to her own son. "I don't want reporters or debt collectors coming to our house because of you," her cousin said, slamming the door in her face. Wandering aimlessly with a heavy suitcase of clothes, the mother-in-law made a desperate attempt. She took a cab to Catherine's parents' house, hoping her former in-laws would still have the conscience to take in an old woman like her. Arriving at the gate of Catherine's parents' imposing home, the mother-in-law was stopped by security guards. She begged on her knees on the hot asphalt to be allowed to see Catherine's mother. "Please tell her I want to apologize. I was out of my mind. I have nowhere to go. I'm her only mother-in-law." But the security guard relayed the cold message from the homeowners. "Sorry, ma'am. The lady of the house said she doesn't know you. She also said that social welfare institutions run by the government are more suitable for housing people without family." The mother-in-law collapsed. Her pride, which once soared to the sky, was now on the ground. Finally, a social services patrol on its rounds detained her for being considered a homeless person disturbing public order. She was transferred to a social welfare institution on the outskirts of the city. There, the mother-in-law had to sleep on a thin mattress, alongside dozens of other homeless people, eat from a tray with meager side dishes, and spend her old age in endless regret without a single child or daughter-in-law to visit her. A week after the sentencing, Catherine decided to visit Mark one last time before he was transferred to a higher security prison. In the visiting room, separated by thick glass and iron bars, Mark was led in by a guard. His appearance was deplorable. His head was completely shaved, his face dull with acne marks and scars that hadn't yet healed. His body looked emaciated, as if only bones were left. The arrogant aura he had always radiated had completely vanished, replaced by an aura of dark despair. Seeing Catherine so radiant, clean, and perfumed, sitting on the other side of the table, Mark broke down in tears. His crying was explosive, the cry of a loser who realizes his stupidity in throwing away a diamond and clinging to trash. Mark tried to reach for Catherine's hand through the bars, but Catherine calmly withdrew it. "Catherine, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was an idiot. Please help me. I can't stand it in here. The food is rotten. I get beaten by other inmates every night. Talk to your lawyer to get my sentence reduced. When I get out, I'll dedicate my life to you. I promise," Mark babbled hoarsely as tears and snot mixed on his dirty face. Catherine looked at Mark with an indecipherable gaze. It wasn't hate or anger. It was a look of pity like one gives to a sick dog dying on the street. Catherine placed a brown envelope on the table. "I didn't come to hear your worthless promises," Catherine said in a soft but firm voice. "I came to deliver a copy of our divorce papers. The family court accepted my petition yesterday. We are now legally divorced. There is no longer any relationship between us." Mark shook his head hysterically, refusing to touch the envelope. "No, Catherine, don't leave me. Who will take care of me? I don't know anything about my mother. Amber has disappeared. I only have you left." Catherine smiled slightly, a smile that hinted at the relief of having shed a huge weight. "That's the point, Mark. You are alone now because of your own choices. You abandoned a sincere wife, exploited a greedy mother, and cheated with a materialistic woman. Now enjoy the harvest of what you have sown." Catherine stood up and adjusted her jacket. She looked Mark in the eye one last time deeply. "Thank you, Mark. Your slap at the airport that day was the best thing you ever did for me. That pain woke me up from a long dream. If it weren't for that slap, I would probably still be living as a foolish wife feeding a parasite like you. Now I am free." Catherine turned and walked towards the exit without looking back, even as Mark screamed her name until he was hoarse and was forcibly dragged by the guards back to his dark cell. Catherine stepped out of the prison building and took a deep breath of the free air. The New York sky, usually gray, seemed unusually blue and clear that day. Justice had been served. Karma had collected its due, and the old book was firmly closed. There were no more grudges weighing on her heart, only a vast relief as wide as the future that now stretched before her. 6 months had passed since the storm of her life had raged and passed. Like a promise from the universe, time acted as the most powerful healer for those who strive to rise again. Catherine's life had changed drastically, far better than she had ever imagined. Her real estate and catering businesses thrived. With the financial leak perpetrated by Mark, eliminated the company's profits soared. Catherine used the profits to expand her business and establish a charitable foundation for victims of domestic violence. A sincere dedication born from her bitter experience to help other women bravely raise their voices. Catherine's name was no longer that of the viral victim wife, but that of an inspiring, strong, and compassionate entrepreneur. Her face often graced business magazines, radiating a balanced beauty and strength. This morning, the atmosphere at Catherine's parents' house was warm and lively. Large suitcases were neatly lined up in the living room, but this time there was no drama, no tension, no parasites. Catherine was helping her mother pack a knitted shawl into her bag. Her father, a wise retired gentleman, hummed a little tune while checking their passports and plane tickets. Today, they were going on a 3-week spring vacation to Europe. This was the trip Catherine had long dreamed of, taking her parents to travel the world with the money she had earned through her hard work, making them happy in their old age. Something that had been postponed before because she was busy with Mark and his family's problems. "Are you ready, honey?" Catherine's father asked, giving her an affectionate pat on the shoulder with a broad smile. "Yes, Dad." "The car to the airport is already waiting outside," Catherine replied, taking her father's arm. She felt a deep peace, feeling the warmth of a real family. There was no more complaining mother-in-law asking for shopping, no Mark just staring at his phone, only her mother's cheerful laughter joking with her father about the arthritis medication he shouldn't forget. The trip to JFK Airport felt very different this time. As their luxury car entered the Terminal 4 area, a memory from 6 months ago crossed Catherine's mind. She looked towards the meeting point at Gate B22 where she was once slapped and humiliated, but strangely there was no more pain. The wound had completely healed, leaving only the scar of a valuable lesson. Catherine smiled faintly at the memory, as if greeting a ghost from the past that no longer had the power to hurt her. She held her parents' hands and walked with a firm, confident step towards the first-class check-in counter. This time there was no drama of declined cards or canceled tickets. The staff greeted them with utmost kindness, offering the best service to Catherine and her family. A few hours later, Catherine was comfortably seated in a first-class seat of a 5-star airline bound for Zurich. The luxurious cabin interior, the seat that converted into a flatbed, and the fresh orange juice on the side table made the atmosphere very private and serene. Her father and mother were sitting across the aisle, enthusiastically pressing the buttons for the advanced features of their seats like little kids. Catherine looked at them with eyes full of happy tears. This was true happiness, sharing wealth with the people who truly love us unconditionally. As the plane began to taxi towards the runway, Catherine, out of boredom, turned on the television screen in front of her to look for something to watch. She switched to the national news channel. Suddenly, a breaking news story caught her attention. The headline was written in large letters on the screen. "High-profile prisoners transferred to maximum security facility." Catherine was about to change the channel but recognized a familiar figure on the screen. The news camera focused on a line of prisoners, with their hands and feet shackled, boarding a ferry bound for an infamous island prison. Among the line of rough-looking inmates was the figure of an emaciated man with a shaved head and sunken face. It was Mark. He looked extremely old and frail, limping as he walked due to the weight of the chains. His face was dirty, and his eyes stared at the ground expressionlessly, as if the soul inside that body were already dead. Beside him, another inmate gave him a sharp shove on the shoulder, and Mark could only accept it submissively, not daring to resist. The news narrator mentioned that Mark had been transferred after being involved in a fight over debts in his previous prison, and would now spend the remaining 12 years of his sentence in a maximum security isolation cell. In another corner of the screen, a brief news item about raids on homeless people showed a glimpse of the mother-in-law's face sitting expressionlessly on the porch of a social welfare center, while Amber's face appeared on a wanted poster for a case of illegal loan fraud. Their worlds had truly collapsed, shattered at the bottom of the abyss they had dug for themselves. Catherine looked at the screen for a few seconds. There was no malicious smile of victory, no excessive satisfaction, no more tears, just a neutral feeling, an acceptance that the law of sowing and reaping was real and absolute. Mark, his mother, and Amber were now just fragments of criminal news on television, strangers who no longer had any relevance in her life. With a slow, elegant movement, Catherine pressed the off button on the remote control. The television screen went black forever, shutting out those faces from the past. Catherine then turned her head towards the airplane window. Outside, the plane's engines roared powerfully, lifting the giant iron bird from the hot tarmac of New York, piercing through the white clouds towards an infinite blue sky. "Catherine, what are you going to eat later?" her mother asked from across the aisle, pulling her from her thoughts. Catherine turned and smiled broadly. The most genuine smile she had ever had. "Anything, Mom. Everything will be delicious if I eat it with you." Catherine leaned back, pulled the soft blanket up to her chest, and closed her eyes. The cold, painful winter of her life was over. The storm had passed, leaving behind fertile ground where new flowers would bloom. Now, at 3,000 feet, Catherine welcomed the eternal spring that had arrived in her life, realizing that happiness is not something begged from others but something created by oneself. With courage, pride, and firmness, the plane continued to soar through the skies, carrying her to new adventures, leaving hell behind and heading towards the paradise she had built with her own hands.